So, my name is Féidhlim Harty, and I'm here with James Breslin, who's one of the farmers in the Inishowen Uplands EIP, isn't that right?
That's
so
right.
It's the environmental, or the European Innovation Programme. So it's a measure for getting farms to have greater protection of watercourses and that type of thing, protecting runoff.
Yeah, protecting the farm from everything, from too much fertiliser, from trying to bring the environment back to the way it used to be, so what I've done here, I've created a couple of ponds, I've put in some shelter belts and what we call green barns, planted some trees and for sheltering my farm. Some of the shelter belts was taken away through different schemes years ago, so done that. I've sown some red clover and some diverse sward to cut out the use of my nitrogen fertiliser. I see it working. I've put cattle back in the mountain and to bring mountains back. We were destocked years ago as well, which wasn't a good idea now, we know, but all these things have turned the clock. I think it's time to go back the way it used to be. So.
And all those measures are designed to protect the water within the catchment?
Yeah, a lot of them is, the trees, a lot of what's planted is along where the water will be running into, bigger streams and rivers and things, and to try and take in the nutrients or whatever's going to that stream to get out of it before it gets there, So it is trying to protect the water courses, definitely. So.
Okay, excellent work, and it's very new in Ireland. It's one of the first areas in the country. There's a handful around the country, but not very many.
There is a handful, all right, but I think we're the first up around here anyway. And a lot of people that have come here seem to like what they've seen and see it's doing what we hoped it would do. So.
Yeah, because there's lots of different measures that can be adopted for protecting watercourses, and what we're looking at today is a series of silt traps, buffer zones, and various different ways. Check dams, planted drains, lots of different ways to keep the silt back within the catchment itself, and not to allow it to flow straight off into rivers and streams around the countryside. So the first one that we've got here is a pond that you've dug out specifically to act as a silt trap for the water running off the upland areas. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about what you've done here?
Well, I haven't done a huge amount. I think it's very simple for any farmer to do it. It's in an area that's really not doing me a lot of harm. It's just a pond that's dug out. It's just what we call a hole in the ground. It's dug out of just a corner of a field. There's stream running into it and there's an outlet out of it. And it is trapping a lot of silt that would normally go down my field or down my shuck, that I would call it. And I would have to clean out that shuck a lot oftener because of the silt trap. All I have to do is clean it out, so I think it's a wise thing to do in any farm.
Yeah, and you can see already how it's becoming colonised with lots of different plants. You can see the rushes beginning to grow. There's water starwort growing at the sides. There's a lot of plants creeping in around the edges and in the middle, and what they'll all do is help to slow down the flow of the water. So as the water is coming down through the system, the silt will settle out even more before it flows on into the drain beside it or into the stream. Will we take a look in and just see how much silt there is and what the depths are like? So you can see here that the silt is after building up quite a lot. You can see where I'm standing now, it's quite silty ground. I'll push the spade in and just see what depth we've got. So that was probably about 1.5 feet deep, wasn't it? Yeah. Deeper. Yeah. And that's all built up. So that's all silt that's not getting into the wider catchment. It's not getting into the streams and it's not getting into the rivers. So it's protecting fish spawning beds and it's protecting rivers from becoming overly silted. And there's, oops, if I can get this out, and there's nutrients in here as well. You can see the algae beginning to grow there. You can see the green algae just forming on the surface of the water. And that's a sign of enrichment by nitrates and phosphates. So that's very, very common in the landscape. Wherever you've got food and farming and industry of any sort around the place, even just septic tanks and percolation areas, you'll get the nitrates and phosphates coming off naturally. If there's too much of that, that can be a problem, because what starts as being a fertiliser in the fields becomes a fertiliser in the rivers and drains and streams. And that leads to too much plant growth and a process called eutrophication, where the water becomes too rich and supports too much plant life and actually reduces the value ecologically for all of the insects and fish that are in the water. So the advantage of a pond like this is that the water can settle, the sunlight can penetrate down into the water, and you can begin to get the algae growing, and other plants as well, and they'll all help to take up those nutrients. So by the time the water leaves the area, it'll be that bit cleaner. And the silt, you can see that You can see the depth of silt right around the place. So that's all material that's washed down during storm events, and it's built up here over time. And let me see. So the inlet point is just here behind us, coming off the hillside, and then there's an outlet just underneath where you're standing there, actually. So can you see that pipe just in there? So the pipe has the advantage of just protecting the soil as the water flows out very quickly. But something that I'd quite like to do, James, if you'd be willing to do it, is to block that pipe up and lengthen the flow path so that there's just that bit more pond that the water passes through each time. And then either to take another pipe out into the drain, or dig up that one if you're increasing the size of the pond, or just have an overground flow straight out into the drain so that that water continues along a longer flow path. And it'll also give us the opportunity to build up the water depth. So if you want more open water, there's two ways to do it. One is to dig your soil down deeper, but a cheaper and easier way to do it is to have your outlet pipe maybe a foot higher, something along those lines, and that'll create open water right the way around. So all we're doing here is laying down the mat of soil against the pipe. Now you could do this with a plank of wood, or you could just build it up with mud from the basin itself. So I'm just caking it right around like that, and what I'll do next is just move some of the mud as well. Wash my hands in that nice clean water. One of the things about this is that it looks really, really simple. Do you know, it looks excessively simple, and yet it wouldn't work on its own because the pressure would be too much. But the fact that there's a spillover point just over there means that it only needs to hold for long enough for the grass roots to spread and seal up, and for that new outlet to begin to become effective. And the thing about it is that a lot of the measures, they are really, really simple. You know, when you're looking at the wider catchment area, it's very, very simple measures that are needed and that are very useful in order to get the desired results. You know, simple, very, very simple damming of drains can make a big difference.
The bottom line is you want the pond to be, more water on it, really, is it?
I'm greedy. I want it to be as big as possible and as deep as possible, within reason. You know, within the bounds of safety and all that. But basically, the bigger it is, the more the water will have time to settle. So the more silt and stones and nutrients will have time to settle out as they come down the hill. So
not last spring, the spring before, this was dug out, so it's not that long here. It has a lot of developing to do, I'd say, yet. And if I change, make it bigger and whatever, I suppose it'll take an extra while for the new bit to come, but I don't know, how long do you think it'll take before I have a pond that everybody will admire?
Okay, so it's been here for about a year.
A year and a half.
Year and a half. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So in a year and a half, we've gone from a soil depth of maybe, foot and a half, something like that, or a water depth of a foot and a half, right back up. So it's taken in a lot of silt in that time. It's a certain amount here at the edges. Down behind me, it's probably, I can see it, lovely. It's actually lovely and clear back here. Back in this area, the water is lovely and clear. I don't know if it's possible to get a shot of that, but you can see right down through the water, and it's.
Most of the dirt, as we would call it, or silt, is trapped up here, I suppose.
It seems to be exactly. Yeah. So there's a certain amount of silt after gathering in this area in the last year and a half. So if you assume that that's a fairly consistent amount of silt coming off the wider catchment, that's gathering here. So in about 3 years, maybe your whole pond would fill up, and I suppose. By making it bigger, if you were to double the area of it and increase the depth, you get maybe 5 years out of it before you need to do any desludging on it.
Right.
But the desludging can be quite useful. It's it's
As the less desludging you do, the better.
Well, it's work. Whenever you get a digger in to dig out the silt, that's work.
Are you affecting the pond by desludging it?
You're doing two things. One is you're going to disturb the ecology of the pond, but on the other hand, you're going to increase the retention volume in the pond. So there's a positive and a negative.
Right.
So basically, if in any given year you don't clear out the whole thing, you know, you make sure that you leave the edges untouched, or you leave a space. If you wanted to make it larger, leave part of the edge untouched, so that you're only really disturbing a certain section each time.
Right.
I think they say about a third of a habitat.
Right.
You know, if you're lowering the silt level,
Yeah.
if you only really lower a third in any given maintenance year. And it's similar in a drain actually. Rather than doing a full drain in any given year, if you can do it in chunks of 50 metres or something along those lines, you leave the plants, then you take away the plants, leave the plants, and so on down along the catchment. And that helps to leave the plants in situ where they'll filter the water, they'll allow silt and grit to settle out and make the water cleaner, and also provide a habitat. Because the insects and the plants that are in the drains, they're a very important component of the water ecology. So if you take out everything in a given maintenance period, what you're doing is you're stripping out the entire catchment. And so by working in sections, it helps to leave that in place. So you don't need to turn around and buy plants each time.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the time of year to do the maintenance, September is probably a good time for a lot of applications. In September, you're just outside of the nesting season, and outside of the exclusion zone for the Habitats Directive, and then you're not yet into the heavy flows that would come in the winter. So you can work on an area like this without having too much water washing in over your fresh work straight away. So we've just covered over our outlet pipe, and the reason is to raise our water levels. Now, when the water begins to spill over there, probably the best thing to do is to watch it. In permaculture, there's a principle, observe and interact. So we'll watch what's happening there, we'll see where it flows, we'll see if there's erosion, or if we can just route our overflow straight back into the drain that's running along beside us. And in that way, by keeping a close eye on it, we'll make sure that there isn't excessive erosion there, because it's important that we don't wash away even more silt by the work that we're doing. So here we've got the outlet from your pond.
Yeah.
So that's coming through, and you said there was a splash deck down there.
There was, yeah.
So there was a stone deck that the water would spray onto and protect the surrounding embankments. Is this one of the...
That was one of the, there were two lumps of bog oak, you know, was put in there. But
perfect. Well, what this has done, it's become a natural dam.
Yeah.
So it's sealing up this area, and that'll improve the water depth. You see, if there was no water there, if there was no standing water, when this flow comes down, it'll cause erosion as it comes out. So your spray deck would have been designed to do that. That's probably your spray deck stone there. There we go. There it is. So the water flows are a bit high by the looks of it. So by having a spray deck underneath this, what we do with that is just to dissipate the flows. So when they come out, they don't cause as much erosion as they would.
well, this is just another, it was to be a pond, but it's more of a silt trap than a pond, I think. Okay. You know, as you can see, they're not the same growth on it because they're more of a flow, and you know, it doesn't get the same chance to settle. But I intend to make it bigger, you know, because it's doing a great job as a silt trap. It has, just as you can see there, it's the amount of silt that you're standing on, you know, and the amount of silt is in front of you. Yeah. If that was going down into the river, it would be doing a lot more harm. Yeah, and there's a lot of big stuff here. Yeah. So there's obviously, you know, there's a good flow down the hill to be bringing those chunks down with it. No, and you can imagine that going on downstream, like it's going to block up somebody else's drains, you know what I mean? So that's... It's the finer silt that I've been more worried about from an ecological point of view. Right. But this just shows the sheer force of water that's coming down. Force of water, that's what I'm saying. Like, and of course you're losing your farm into it as well. Exactly. Which is no fun. Exactly. And when this was built, what was the depth below the water at the time that it was built? I would say it was about a foot below what you can see, at least a foot below what you can see. Right. You know what I mean? So let's see. From the top of the water, it was 3 foot at least, you know. So it's funny actually, it's not showing up as a lot of silt, but that might be because there's stone and stuff in the base of it. Possibly. But we can still see there's a good, just there now. I'm going to lose the ranging rod, I'm afraid. So you can actually see there's quite a bit that's accumulated over time. Yeah. You know, okay, an easy way to make this bigger, I mean there's a couple of things that could be done. One is to extend it out into the field a little bit. You know, another is to dig back slightly further up here. Yeah. But a really, really cost-effective way to do it, just working within the existing boundaries, would be to put in a dam just here. If you put in a good peat down there and put maybe a 4-inch pipe at the base and a 1-foot pipe higher up, the water will oscillate slightly. So during a heavy flow, there'll be a little bit of storage space here
for the water build up and then to drop down again when the flow abates. So that might be one way to approach it.
Right.
Or even a series of check dams down along through the drain. James, you say that this is a newly planted field?
Yeah, this is a year and a half old as well. It's diverse sward. They're a mixture of plantain, chicory, clovers, and there is some grass through it as well.
Okay.
But no, it's a very good sward.
And is that a much bigger mix of species than the usual sward?
It's a bigger mix of species definitely than what I've used before.
Right.
And like I've used less dosing, I've used no fertiliser.
Okay.
So
so there's benefits for the livestock.
It's a field that's costing me very little and producing as much as the field that's costing me more in fertiliser, you know. So I've ploughed this field here and that's going to go into diverse sward as well beside that, you know. So before this I wouldn't have been doing that, you know, it would have been perennial grass, but it's definitely going to be this diverse sward. This, you know, it's cut down my dosing, as I said, and cut down my fertiliser, so it's cut down costs.
Brilliant.
And that's what I want.
And from a water point of view, the difference in the root depths means that if you've got slightly deeper rooting plants every so often, they'll just hold more water in the landscape. And that's something you're looking at and seeing as well.
That's something I know very little about, but I'm learning.
Okay. It's fascinating to watch and to see the dynamics change. As the roots get deeper, it holds more water, provides better drainage. So all of those things, and also you probably get greater carbon storage.
And it grounds open,
the ground as well.
you know. So.
Yeah, so you've got a drain at the bottom of the field there.
Yeah.
So with the diverse sward, if you don't have as much fertiliser going on, you're providing a lot of benefits presumably for to keep nitrates and phosphates low at the very bottom.
So, no, and like this area up here will run into, I've planted these trees to capture any nutrients that comes down there, you know, so.
Okay.
Over along the glen, because I call it a glen, you know, over along the river, we have done a riparian zone, you know, which will capture hopefully all the nutrients that goes down there. But
brilliant.
Hopefully, if I get into these swards, there'll not be as much runoff.
As much coming,
you know, nutrients runoff.
Will they be permanent pasture then once they're established? They will. Okay. So you plough it once, seed it, and generally it's okay.
I hope it'll
then.
do me a long time.
Yeah,
you know,
so. Lovely. And that'll just knit the soil together and lead to a lot much less runoff.
Yeah, exactly.
And I see here along the side of this little stream here, whenever you do have runoff, if it's migrating in towards the stream here at this point, it'll be filtered through your buffer zone. So you've got a big belt. It's about 5-6 metres of trees on either side.
I've got a good area, and it's both shelter and capture, I suppose. Yeah. You know, so it'll do both.
Yeah, and trap the water, help it soak into the groundwater, and to contain it, and to filter up any nitrates and phosphates as well. Let silt settle out. All of those benefits for water quality are amazing. And it's something, you know, if you had a couple of hours free and a handful of trees, something you could do is if you planted a buffer zone or a hedgerow right across the tangent of the field, then what you get is as the water moves down overground, that'll soak in preferentially around the trees. So there was a study in Pontbren in Wales where they found that the water was soaking in 67 times more where there was ungrazed ground with trees as opposed to the area outside the fence which was grazed with sheep and no trees. So what I'm looking at here is it's just a drain that's taking water off the land and it's flowing down towards a river further on down the valley there. And what I want to look at specifically here is you can see that there's relatively little vegetation, there's a bit of a fall, so this drain has been cleaned in the last couple of years. But down at this side, there's a bit of a rise here, very, very small rise, but there's a bit of a rise just at the end. And so what James has done here is he's cleaned this section and then he's left the rest of it alone, which means that as the water comes along, it gets a chance to filter down as it goes down towards the main river. And it's very, very easy to do. I mean, it's essentially a not doing, it's a careful not doing essentially, just by leaving that bank in place. Now, one of the things that could be done here as well is further up where the drain is a little bit flatter, we could make another small check dam in the middle of the drain, preferably with some sod or stone and sod, something along those lines. You need the sod just to bind it together. And you can see here, the erosion isn't so great that the plants can't get established. So you can see the rushes and grasses and various other plants that are growing here. They're enough to hold the soil in place. So if we did something similar in sod just above the fence, we'd be able to catch more water where the drain is a little bit flatter. So here is just an example of not cleaning out a drain where it's not necessary for it to be cleaned out. It's important to dig a drain down if it's taking in field drains from around the area and they need to be kept flowing, but otherwise just leaving them be is the best option often. Okay, we're along the riverside on James's farm, and it's a long drop down to the river on a steep bank, but we can see where he's fenced off the riparian zone, the area along beside the river, and you can see the rowan berries here, there's hawthorn, there's hazel, there's oak, there's a wide variety of trees here that all support wildlife and biodiversity. And further up the hill you can see where he's put in supplementary planting in the fenced area, and that's all to create what he calls a green barn. It's shelter for the sheep as they're around the area. So there's fencing on this side, fencing off the riparian zone, and up there where the tree guards are is where the sheep are allowed in. And that all helps to improve biodiversity, and it also improves water quality improvement, letting the water settle and soak into the ground preferentially and take up nutrients that would otherwise become pollution in the river. So James, here we are down closer to the bottom of the river, closer to the bottom of the farm, down near your river. I love the way you've got the trees planted right beside the pasture here.
Yeah.
So you've got the fencing against the sheep. Do you want to tell me a bit about this?
This here, I suppose, is to capture two birds with one stone, as we say. You know, it's to capture any runoff that's coming off that field up there. You can see that braes running down here. You know, plus it's another shelter belt. It's a green barn, as far as I'd be concerned. You know, and we can see the river here behind us. You know, anything that comes down there now should be captured with them trees before it enters the water.
Excellent stuff.
I think it should be good for the environment and good for that river.
I see there's a difference in the grazing between the main field and the area here. Have you mown that section?
Yeah, that was topped, you know.
Okay.
But this here, I suppose, maybe it's older.
And probably, so this would have been historically fenced off, would it?
No, it never was fenced off, but it was always, it wouldn't have been cultivated the same as the actual field
the same
that you're
as the
looking
main
at.
area.
You know,
so
the main area would have been.
Why it's a bit rougher.
You know, this here was what you call rough grazing in here.
Okay.
You know,
and the sheep will probably go for whatever herbs they want to for health.
Yeah, well that's why we put the 3 yards around. There's an area up there that's fenced off.
Okay.
But here we done it with 3 yards so that the animals could go on around.
Yeah.
You know, there's an electric fence to go around it, so just to keep the cattle out, but the sheep can graze in around it, and you can see they're managing it well. Besides,
okay,
you know, when you have it fenced off, you have to manage it yourself, or the animals will manage it for you if you don't. You know,
so you've got the benefits of the grazing, and you've got the benefits of the water protection, so that it keeps the river cleaner.
So hopefully, it's doing 3 jobs. You know,
yeah.
It's grazing the sheep and it's protecting the water and it's creating a shelter belt.
Lovely, lovely. Very nice. No, I'm looking forward to seeing that in 10 years' time when it thickens up.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of these, you know, these things that I've done, it's going to take a bit of time before we see the results.
Yeah. Even already, though, you can see over where the other shelter belt is. I mean, from the moment it's fenced, it's giving you improvement immediately.
Yeah.
And what varieties of trees have you in amongst the...
Oh, there are a mixture of trees. There's elder, there's oak, there's hazel, there's birch.
And a bit of willow popping up as well.
You can see the willow, the way it's...
Lovely.
It seems to be doing better than the rest. Well, there's some of them, you know, different ones that's doing better than others, but they're a mixture of trees, mostly native, you know.
Lovely.
So.
Very nice.